so, how much? And because the FAFSA is an annual application, if your income fluctuates year to year, you could see where maybe one year the student's eligible for a lot of need-based aid, and the next year they may not be eligible for any, because it will fluctuate based on that income from year to year. And so the example given here is the Pell Grant. That's a federal grant program, but again, the sources could vary. But if it's need-based, then it's looking at the EFC score determined on the student's FAFSA to determine that eligibility for it. There's also non-need-based aid. We're actually very fortunate to be in Georgia. We have one of the largest non-need-based programs in the nation, and that's the HOPE grant that you see listed there. And this is awarded strictly based on the residency. So it doesn't have anything to do with merit or GPA test scores. It doesn't have anything to do with income or need-based. It's awarded strictly based on the fact that that student's a U.S. citizen, permanent resident, and resident of the state of Georgia. That's the only requirements for that. So for that reason, that's why they consider that program to be non-need based. And then there's also loans. Now, most loans will be in the student's name, but there could be situations where there are loans in the parent's name. I want to caution families when we approach the idea of financial aid in terms of loans, because at this point, especially, if you have seniors or especially underclassmen, we still have time to apply for all the scholarships and grants, and that's considered gift aid. So money does not have to be repaid. So at this point, we really want students to be pursuing those options. Loans are something that we can take a look at once we get closer to that fall payment deadline. Maybe additional money is needed. But while we have time to apply for all the gift aid, we really want to do that and not necessarily pursue loan options this early.
Excuse me, Ben. We're
Yes,
not able to see the screen. It's not advancing. So we're still seeing the COVID updates in the Georgia Future page.
Oh, let's see. Thank you for, let's see. Can you see that now?
Yes, we see that now. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for that. I'm sorry. I'm not sure what happened. So let's see if I can advance the screen here. All right. So loans are an option, but that's something that, especially since we have time to apply for the scholarships and grants, we want to pursue those options before start looking at loans. And then there's also employment opportunities such as federal work study. This is essentially where the student could have a part-time job on the college campus and use that as a way to help pay for school. That's actually one of the questions that you'll see on the FAFSA application. So if your student is interested in working while they're in school, that's an excellent opportunity for those students. In fact, there are also federal work study positions for graduate school too. So parents, if you're looking to go back as well, that's another form of financial aid that's available for graduate work. But aside from that, there's also military aid and grant programs for the families that serve. And then there's Path to College 529 Savings Plan. That's a federal tax code. That's more of a long-term college savings. If you have younger kids or siblings, things like that, excellent savings opportunity for them. All right, so those are the different types of financial aid that we're working with. And then under the different types, you're going to see that there's different sources available as well. The ones that we're going to be focused on tonight are the federal and state sources. And both of those are applied for by completing the FAFSA application that I mentioned earlier. But aside from that, there's also college scholarships and grants through the different colleges and universities. The thing I want you to note here is that that is a separate application process. So in addition to filling out the FAFSA, you definitely need to follow up with the different schools that they're looking at. And this is where the process can become a little bit difficult, is that there's not a universal deadline for all colleges. They set those deadlines based on population sizes. And so what I mean by that is everyone's experience through this process is going to be a little bit different based on where your student wants to go to college. If they're looking at a very large school like a Division I school, UGA, Georgia Tech, Duke, places like that, those deadlines are going to be very early. And that's just simply because they have more applications to process. If your student's looking at a smaller local college or maybe a tech school, something like that, those deadlines might not be until late spring. So again, everyone's experience is going to be a little bit different, but our top priority in all of financial aid, no matter what the type or what the source, is we have to find out what the deadlines are and making sure that we get the information to those deadline commit or to those scholarship committees by the deadline that they requested. And as you start these deadlines, you'll notice that most colleges have an admissions deadline. That's when the student needs to be accepted in order to attend. They're going to have a scholarship deadline, which applies for their institutional scholarships. And then they're going to have a financial aid deadline referring to when they need that FAFSA form completed by to process the federal and state aid. And then there may be more deadlines than that. For example, if they're staying on campus, there's going to be a housing deadline and things like that. So the difficulty in this sometimes can be navigating all those deadlines because, again, they're going to be all over the place based on where the student's looking at. So it requires to make sure that the student's finding out what those deadlines are and make sure we get the information to them in time. In fact, that's the number one thing that we found that disqualifies students. It's not necessarily GPAs or test scores. It's just simply getting the information in too late. And so make sure that you guys are aware of those, especially the schools that you're interested in, because again, we'd hate for you to lose out on that funding if you're eligible to receive it. The other sources that we see here, private foundations, professional and service organizations, and employers, these are going to be found on various database websites. GA Futures is one of those. We have about 22,000 scholarships on our website. There's a lot of other good websites that you can use as well. In fact, there's one, fastweb.com is probably one of the larger ones, scholarships.com. There's an app I've seen students use now that's called Scholly, which helps match them up with scholarships. And then another good resource I found too is just check with your local high schools. To the county or city that your student attends. Usually they have a list of local scholarships as well. And so that's a good way to kind of pull all that funding together. And without spending too much time on this, for the students that are joining us tonight, be strategic in your scholarship searches. And what I mean by that is, when you apply for a national scholarship, you're competing on a national level. So unless you're very strong athletically or academically or whatever the category is, your chances of receiving that may be slim. When you're applying for local scholarships or specific scholarships, that's how we can increase our chances. So in other words, if you're a part of any clubs, organizations, athletic associations, religious affiliations, whatever it is that's specific to you, that's what we want to target, because that's how we increase our chances of receiving that aid. So when you're using these scholarship databases, I can promise you're going to feel very overwhelmed when you first take a look at them, because when you're looking at websites that have thousands upon thousands of scholarships, the first thing we think is, how do I know which ones to apply for first? And so use those search tools and things like that to narrow it down to things that are specific to you. And that's the best advice that I can give you, especially when navigating a lot of those larger websites. This is just a snapshot of the one on GA Futures. So again, you guys are more than welcome to take a look at that later this evening. But again, there's different search tools that you can use and websites. But again, be very specific when you're looking for those scholarships. All right, real quick, I want to kind of talk a little bit about the federal aid that's available. The most common program is going to be the Pell Grant, and this is a need-based grant that will award $63.45 per academic year, and that's based at a 0 EFC. And what I mean by that is when you fill out the FAFSA form, if it comes back and says your EFC is 0, then the student would be looking at that full amount, that $63.45. And from there, it's a sliding scale. So for example, if your EFC were 1,000, the student would be looking at $53.45. If your EFC were 2,000, it'd be $43.45. So it will fluctuate. Once your EFC exceeds a little over 6,000, then the student would be ineligible for that specific need-based grant. Now, there's also another federal grant called FSEOG funding. That stands for Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. And this is awarded to the students that are showing the greatest financial needs. So this is going to be students closer to that 0 EFC score. Now, not every college receives FSEOG funding. They do have to apply for it, and it is in somewhat limited supply. But if a student is receiving FSEOG funding, they're also receiving Pell Grant, because again, it's usually going to the students that are closer to that 0 EFC. And it's also up to the college how they disperse that money. So for example, if they wanted to give more students a smaller piece of the pie, they could do that, or they could give the full 4,000 until it ran out. So again, it's up to the school's discretion on how they award it, but it's awarded in addition to the Pell Grant, because again, it's going to the students that are showing the greatest need. And then the federal work study also falls under this, and this is again like a part-time job on the college campus. If you're interested in this, feel free to select yes on the application. It's not binding. So even if you select yes on the FAFSA application, you're interested in work study, but later on you change your mind, you're like, no, I don't really want to do that. You can change your mind. It's not a binding agreement. But just some examples, I mean, things like campus tour guide, working in the library, sporting events, office assistant. I'll be honest with you, I did it when I was in school, and it was a great way sometimes to be able to do your homework and get paid for it. It's not always like that. You know, there are busy times that you really will be working and doing stuff. But, you know, if your student's interested in working while they're in school, honestly, it's a great opportunity just to make a little extra money or apply that towards the total cost of the college. Again, you can do it for graduate work too. So if you're looking to go back to school, that's an opportunity to help pay for that as well. And then the other type of federal programs are going to be your loans. And again, these are federal loans. And typically why you would want a federal loan as opposed through like a bank or credit union is typically the interest rates are lower. That's not always the case. You know, I guess it would depend on the credit score, but typically they are lower than what you would find at other banks or credit unions. Now, these federal loans are given in what's called full faith that the student will repay that loan, which means it's not based on credit score. And because of that, they cap the amount of loan money that students can take out in their name. So if additional money was needed on top of those caps, that's when the parents would come in, and those would be parent loans. And those are the plus loans that you see listed at the bottom there. Those are loans either in the parent's name or loans that are for graduate students. The ones that would be in the student's name are going to be at the top, the subsidized and unsubsidized loan. Now, the difference between the subsidized and unsubsidized really comes down to who's paying the interest on the loan. With a subsidized loan, the government or taxpayers are paying the interest on that while the student's in school. And with unsubsidized, the student is responsible for that interest. The interest rate is the same for both. It's 2.75%. But there's only so much subsidized loan money. I believe it's $3,000. That's the cap. So if you needed additional loan money on top of that $3,000, that's when it would be unsubsidized. And again, these are awarded based on need. The subsidized are. The unsubsidized loans on this slide here is just like a regular loan. If the student needs to take it out, they're responsible for the interest and the principal. And there are caps to how much they can take out. So this chart here will show you how much students are allowed to take out. So for a freshman, that is a maximum of $5,500. And you'll see that increases $1,000 for each year that they're in school. So $6,500 for sophomores and $7,500 for juniors and seniors. Now, you'll notice the ones at the bottom, the amounts increased. And the reason for that is these are students that are classified as independent. So on the FAFSA form, there's going to be a dependency section, which determines whether the student's classified as a dependent or independent. Independent would be a situation where the parents are not in the student's life. This is like foster care, things like that, homeless youth. There's about 13 criteria that would make a student independent. A lot of these are things like, is the student over the age of 24? Are they married? Do they have kids? Do they serve in the armed forces? Are they in foster care? Are they homeless? Things like that. And so that's what would classify a student as independent. And in that case, the loans work the same way. They just increase the amount because they do not have that parental support. They offer those students the option of borrowing a little bit more money if they needed to help pay for school. And that's pretty much a wrap on the federal aid. So federal aid is going to fall into two categories, which are need-based and federal loans. And then state aid, which we're going to talk about in just a second, that's going to fall into two other categories, which are going to be merit-based and non-need-based. So the point is, by completing the one FAFSA application, the student is applying for every type of aid that's available. And so that's kind of the importance of doing it. As you can see here, the Georgia Lottery programs fund all these scholarships and grants that we're going to talk about this evening. That's how the whole program is funded. There is a general eligibility requirement that applies to all of the programs that fall under HOPE. And we just refer to this as the residency requirement. In other words, you have to be a U.S. citizen, permanent resident. You have to be a resident of the state of Georgia, and you have to be enrolled in a HOPE eligible school. And what we mean by that is, it's probably one of the most common questions I get is, what is a HOPE eligible institution? And we have it divided up into three categories on the GA Futures website: public, private, and technical. To give you an example of a school that would not be HOPE eligible, think of something like, let's see here, Phoenix University. Maybe you guys have seen the commercials on TV. They have a campus in Atlanta, but their home school is located in another state. That would not be HOPE eligible. The campus itself has to be, the base campus itself has to be located in Georgia in order for it to meet that HOPE eligibility. And so again, especially if you're looking to receive one of the state scholarship programs, go on the website, take a look at the list, and make sure your school is going to be on that eligible roster list. In addition to that, is meeting that residency requirement, students need to have a 3.0 academic HOPE GPA. Now, keep in mind that a HOPE GPA is different than the student's overall GPA, because HOPE only looks at 5 core areas. It looks at math, English, natural science, social science, and foreign language. And in addition to that 3.0, they need to have 4 rigorous courses. And rigor is defined by DOE as an AP IB dual enrollment of advanced math, science, or foreign language. So that's not 4 each year, that's 4 total throughout high school, in addition to that B average. Some of these advanced courses might not be as advanced as you think. So for example, advanced math could be like higher level math. Advanced science could be things like chemistry, biology too. Advanced foreign language is just a second unit of foreign language. So that's things like French too, Spanish too, things like that. So most students are already getting several of these courses throughout high school already. But again, they need to have 4 total, 4 or more, in order to qualify for HOPE in addition to that 3.0. And again, they can check their GA Futures account to see their HOPE GPA. The high schools start uploading that as early as 9th grade. And so if they log on to their account on GA Futures, and by the way, if they don't have one, they can create one. And that's how they can go online to check that HOPE GPA. And usually the high schools, I believe they do uploads twice a year. I believe it's sometime around February, and then for seniors again in June. And so each time they upload that transcript, it will recalculate that, and they will be able to see their updated HOPE GPA, so to speak. And it will also show them how many rigorous courses they've taken as well, so they can see if they're going to be on track for that scholarship. Now, one thing to keep in mind, especially for students, is, once they qualify for HOPE out of high school, they have to maintain that in the college. And so in order to keep that GPA, they just need to maintain that 3.0 in school. And there's the checkpoints listed for you there when they're going to check their GPA. That's the end of every spring semester. And then also the 30, 60, and 90 attempted hours. That's where they're going to check to make sure they have that minimum. If they were to lose the scholarship, they do have one opportunity to regain it. But if they lose it the second time, that's when they've lost it for good. So just encourage the students to keep up the good work. And then just like how they're able to check their high school HOPE GPA, if they log on to GA Futures, they can also check their college HOPE GPA as well. Same place, just a different link for My College HOPE profile. All right, the second scholarship, this is going to be your upper tier of state aid, sort of the upper echelon. And there are 2 ways to qualify for the Zell Scholarship. either if they graduate valedictorian or salutatorian, will automatically guarantee them that scholarship. Outside of that, they'd have to meet the academic criteria of a 3.7 along with one of those test scores. Now, one thing I want to note here that's really important is that you may have heard a lot of the universities, specifically in Georgia, are waiving for the class of 2021. I'm not sure if that's the case with all the Georgia colleges or just certain ones. But even though the admissions process may be saying we don't need test scores necessarily to admit you, that doesn't apply to the Zell scholarship. So if your student's on track for one of these scholarship programs, they still need to take the SAT or ACT in order to receive that. Especially, if your student has a 3.7 or higher, encourage them to make sure they take the SAT or ACT, because they will need one of those test scores in addition to that to qualify for the scholarship. Even though the college may not be requiring it for admission, they're still going to need it for the scholarship. And just like the Hope Scholarship, they do have to maintain their Zell in college, and it's a 3.3 initially in high school to receive it. Once you get into college, it's a 3.3 to maintain it. And the same checkpoints apply at the end of every spring, and then also the 30, 60, and 90 attempted hours. And this is probably one of the more important slides of the presentation in terms of when it expires. And that's when the student crosses one of 3 checkpoints: 127 attempted hours, 10 years from the date of their high school graduation, or their degree, whichever one of the 3 comes first. The one thing I want to note here is you see that word attempted hours, that catches a lot of students. And so just kind of explain a little bit of how that works. Especially students that are first generation college students, things like that, they're transitioning from high school to college. They get there on the college campus, and a lot of times we see them register for too many courses or too heavy a course load, things like that. And sometimes dropping those courses after the drop add date, even though it may give them a W for withdrawal and not affect their GPA, it's still being deducted from their total 127 attempted hours. So the point is, if you have students that are registering for a lot of classes and then dropping those, registering for more, dropping those, they're going to get to that senior year and be out of scholarship money. Because if it's after the drop add date, it's still being deducted from that 127, whether they complete that course or not. So just encourage the students to only register for classes that they intend to complete. Because if they end up dropping too many courses, that's when it's going to start cutting into that budget. Most bachelor programs, as you guys know, are around 120 hours, which gives students 1, maybe 2 classes that they can drop without it cutting into that budget. Outside of that, they have 10 years from the day of their high school graduation to use all of their Hope funds. For those students that are going active duty after high school, they will extend that 10-year mark for those students. Otherwise, 10 years, 127 attempted hours, or the degree, whichever one of 3 comes first, is when the scholarships do expire. And then just real briefly, we're going to touch on the grants. Now, remember, the grants are considered non-need based. So that means there's no minimum GPA or test score requirements to initially qualify for these. The only requirement for the grants is that the student meet that residency, which is U.S. citizen, permanent resident, resident of the state of Georgia, and enrolling in a Hope eligible school. So as you can see here, for the Hope grant, no minimum GPA or test score requirement needed. However, after the first 30 paid hours, which is roughly after the first year, the students need to have a 2.0 or higher to continue to receive that funding. And these grants pay a maximum of 63 semester hours, which is about 2 years full time. Half the time the scholarships do. The Zell grant, no minimum GPA or test score initially, but in order to continue to receive it, the student needs to have a 3.5 at the end of every semester or term. If they don't have the 3.5, what it's going to do is default them down to the Hope grant, assuming it's above a 2.0. If they bring their GPA back above a 3.5, they can regain their Zell grant. So in other words, you can move within the program, you just can't receive both in the same semester. Either you're Zell eligible, you're Hope eligible, or you're not eligible for either. And then there's also the Hope Career Grant. This is probably one of my favorite ones because this is the only grant that you can use in addition to the others. This will stack. And the reason for that is the Hope Career Grant was initially started to identify careers in Georgia that are in high demand and to give those students that are going into the high demand fields a little extra money for college. The list of eligible programs is constantly changing from year to year. It started out only, I think it was like 30, maybe 35 programs. It's now over 200. As you can see, it's kind of across the spectrum here, everything from diesel and automotive to aviation to welding, practical nursing, early childhood, commercial truck driving, computer programming. Because of the movie production and things in Georgia, we've added that one over the past couple of years. So as you can see, a lot of different stuff. If any of that stuff's interesting to your students, encourage them to apply for the grant program, because again, these are certificate or diploma programs, so these are going to be almost exclusive to technical colleges. And then there's also the Hope GED grant, and this is for students that maybe encountered hardships in high school, had to drop out and get their GED. They're eligible for a $500 voucher that's good for up to 24 months after receiving their GED that they can use at any of the TCSG technical college schools in Georgia. This is a very simplified award chart. It's pretty sad if you ask me, but I couldn't fit the real one on the slide here, so you'll have to go to the website to see the whole list. But I tried to kind of explain it as best I could. As you can see here, the main difference between the Zell and the Hope is that Zell pays full standard tuition. That means 100% of the tuition aspect associated with college is paid, assuming it's public. Now, if it's a private Hope eligible school in Georgia, you can still use your Zell or Hope here, but because their tuition rates are much higher, it's no longer percentage based, it's just a flat amount towards the private institutions. But if you're on the Zell scholarship or Zell grant, 100% of that tuition is paid, assuming it's public. The difference between that and Hope is that Hope only pays a portion of it. And right now, that's still the majority. Currently, I believe the Hope portion is around 75, 80% of that tuition. It will fluctuate year to year based on lottery sales. The Zell stays the same. It stays 100%. The Hope can fluctuate year to year based on those lottery sales. We've seen 2% increase last year. We don't know what it's going to be this year yet. But again, those we get those reports from the Lottery Commission around April. And so usually sometime around May or June is when this chart's updated to show the new amounts for the upcoming year. So again, it's still the majority, but it can fluctuate year to year. And then just like the Zell at private institutions, it's no longer percentage based, it's just a flat amount. So if you go to the award chart on GA Futures, you can select your college and it'll show you exactly the dollar amount it's going to pay for the upcoming year. So it'll give you an idea of how much to expect of that school. Now, the last state program I want to mention to you real quick is the student access loan. I really don't like pushing loans because, again, I feel like students should be pursuing the gift aid first. But I do want to make you aware of this program. If you get closer to that fall payment deadline and additional money is needed, this is probably the best loan program that I've seen. It has to be used in Georgia at a Georgia Hope eligible school, so you can't use it out of state. But it's only a 1% interest rate, so it's even lower than the federal loans. And it's up to $8,000 a year with a $36,000 aggregate. They do prioritize Hope and Zell scholars. So, and then remaining applicants have until the end of the application cycle to apply. There's only so much that they are able to loan out each year. So I would advise applying early. The application process opens up in May and runs through September. But if this is something that can help the student or your family, please know that's available. It's called the Student Access Loan, and it's available on the GA Futures website. And then here are some other state loan or not state loan, but here are some other state programs. And for the sake of time, we're not going to get into each one of these. These are fairly specific. So things for like Georgia National Guard, Public Safety Memorial Grant. That's for families that were injured or killed in the line of public safety duty. Tuition equalization grant. That's for students looking at a private college. It's basically an additional $900 for those students going to private school. Hero Scholarship is very similar to public safety, except this is going to be military families that were injured or killed in the line of duty. Reach Scholarship is a mentorship program for students that are identified as high risk in middle school. If they follow through that mentorship program throughout high school, that's $20,000 waiting for them. We have some scholarships for engineering education and several things to the University of North Georgia for military and ROTC. So again, these are going to be fairly specific to the student and family, but if these apply to you, make sure you're checking out the application. Again, it's on the GA Futures website. The application for these is going to be called GSF Apps. GSF Apps. And in fact, you can find it there. Here's a snapshot of the website. First tab, Hope and State Aid programs, and on the top of that, you'll see state aid applications. Now, real quick, I want to mention this. I don't know if we have any current seniors with you. I'm not going to get too much into FAFSA because we're kind of going over already. But this is the website where you'll apply for the federal and state aid, things including HOPE, Zell, Pell Grant, FSEOG funding, all that stuff. It is an online application. So you go to FAFSA.gov.gov. One thing, do not go to FAFSA.com or FAFSA.org. They will charge you to fill out this application. And as you can see, it is free. Each year, the application opens October 1st. That's the soonest you can do it. And remember, the deadline is going to be set by the college that you're looking at. They determine the deadline. So make sure that you're getting in by the financial aid deadline that they have listed on their website. Here's a snapshot of it on the right. If you're doing it from a mobile device, you need to download the app called My Student Aid. Either one is fine. If you go into the web address, you can see it listed there, FAFSA.gov. So for current seniors, there's always two applications on the website at all times. One for students that are already in college, and then another one for upcoming freshmen. So if you're a current senior in high school, you want to do the 21-22 application, and that's going to require 2019 tax information. Now, juniors, your application will release October 1st of 2021, and your application will be the 22-23 application, and that's going to require 2020 taxes, so the ones that are being filed right now. So again, it just kind of follows forward like that. But again, current seniors can fill it out now. If you're a junior or underclassman, you will need to wait until you're a senior to be able to fill out that form. Here's the type of information that you'll need when you get ready to fill it out. You'll need the social of the parent and student. You'll need those tax information and W-2s, depending on what year you're filling it out. Current seniors will need the 2019 income tax forms. Bank statements, investment records, records of untaxed income. That can be things like Social Security, disability, child support, 529 plans. All that's reported on the FAFSA form. And then when you get ready to fill it out, it's going to require you to set up what is called an FSA ID. And essentially what that is a username and password that works as your electronic signature. So when you set that up, you're going to use the same FSA ID every year to fill out your FAFSA. So make sure students, when you set that up, it's a username and password that you can remember. And also, here's a tip too. Don't use your high school email. I see a lot of students doing that now. And once you graduate high school, you may or may not have access to that email anymore. So if you haven't already set yourself up with a professional email, definitely now would be the time to do that. Don't share your FSA ID with anyone. Remember, this is going to be how you're applying for your state aid, scholarships, Pell Grant, things like that. And a lot of this aid is a one-time deal. So, definitely keep this information safe. It's not something that you want to share. I hate to say this every year, but parents, do not share your FSA ID with your student. The reason I say that is I've seen nightmare situations where students have taken out parent loans in the parent's name, and the parents never even knew about it because they had their FSA ID. So again, this is information that you want to keep to yourself. Students don't share yours, parents don't share yours either. Just a quick snapshot. This is sort of what the application looks like online. You can see the different tabs across the top as you progress through the application. It's going to ask you what colleges you want to send it to. You want to go ahead and have applied to those schools first. Because if you haven't applied to the school and you send them a FAFSA form, it just kind of hangs out there in internet space. They don't have a file to attach it to. So go ahead and start the application process first, and then you can list up to 10 different colleges on the FAFSA form to send it to. Once you've been accepted to that college and completed the FAFSA and sent your FAFSA to that school, then they're able to process that and start sending out the award letters. This is a snapshot of the dependency status. So this will be what determines whether the student's classified as dependent or independent. If the student's classified as dependent, then that's where you'll see the parent section is next. If the student's classified as independent, then it will skip that parent section and go directly to the financials. It will also let you use what is called the IRS data retrieval tool, and this has made this application way easier than it used to be. Now what it does is it'll ask for your FSA ID, and so once you enter that and hit transfer, it will link you over to the IRS, have you verify your identity, and download your tax information from the IRS onto your FAFSA form. So it saves you a lot of time. You don't have to use this tool. If you prefer not to, then you'll just have to input that information manually. And so you'll need a copy of your tax forms in order to do that. But either way is fine as long as the information gets on the form. And then you'll get to the end of the application, and that's where both the parent and the student will sign it with their FSA ID and then submit. And as soon as you hit submit, you'll get a confirmation page to the student email. So again, this is important to make sure that the student has an email address that is active and that they check, because as the student approaches 18 years old and things like this, we're starting to get into what is called FERPA territory, which is Privacy Acts. And so just about all the communication going from the college to the student is going to be doing that. It's not going to go to the parent anymore. So just make sure that the student is checking their email, because all the correspondence is going to be going there. But on the confirmation page, it will tell you what that EFC is of the student or household. And then based on that EFC, it'll immediately tell you how much federal aid you're going to be eligible for. Now, outside scholarships and institutional aid and things like that, you won't know until the college processes it. But initially, it will tell you what your federal aid is going to be, and the other state aid and institutional aid, things like that, will follow on the award letter. The student will also get what is called a SAR, a student aid report. This usually takes about 3 to 5 business days, but essentially it's just a copy of their FAFSA that they submitted. Real quick, I do want to mention this stuff. Special circumstances. Now, things happen in our life that we can't put on a tax form. And everyone knows that, but this is an appeals process that you have to go through with the college. And the reason I bring this up is, if you've changed jobs since 2019, you're making less money now than you were then. If there were excessive medical bills, if there were a change in marital status, maybe you had 2 incomes, now you're down to 1. Unusual dependent care, things like this. The theme here is documentation. The more documentation you have, you can sit down with the financial aid office, or maybe not now, but virtually. You can meet with financial aid experts at the college and say, hey, here's the situation, provide them with that documentation, and they have the power to adjust that and potentially get your students some more financial aid. But again, they have to have the proper documentation to do so. So this is what is called a professional judgment or special circumstance. So again, hopefully nothing like this impacts your family, but if it does, know that there are options you can go through. You do not appeal it to FAFSA, but you appeal it to that college's financial aid office. They're the ones who are going to work with you and potentially override that and get your students some more aid. So again, if anything like that happens, do know that you have options. And then there are, once the student's been accepted and sent their FAFSA form into the school, there's different timelines. Some schools process these applications faster than others. But once they do, they'll be sending out an award letter. And again, this is going to go to the student. And you can compare those award letters and see which school is going to offer you the most money. And maybe that might impact your decision in terms of where you go. But each school that the student's been accepted to and sent the FAFSA form to, you'll receive an award letter. And the award letter does not mean the money's been applied. It just simply outlines the cost, saying if you choose to go to our school, here's our COA, or cost of attendance. Here's how much aid you're eligible for, and here's the amount that's going to be owed, or maybe not. So, it depends on the school. But either way, it's just going to outline the cost for you. and there'll be additional steps you have to take with the college to apply that money to the student account. Or you can say, no, I'd like to withdraw my application at this time. So again, be looking out for those award letters. Typically, those start going out sometime around spring. The Division I schools will start sending them out a little earlier, but again, it will depend on the school. All right, we're almost there. Here's some additional resources for you guys. Again, gafutures.org is a huge resource. Check your Hope GPA, scholarship database, college and career planning. We put out a magazine publication. It's not printed anymore due to budget cuts, but it is digital. It's called the Georgia College Connector. If you have students that, especially maybe underclassmen, that are still trying to figure out what it is they want to do or what do they want to study, things like that, that's a great read for them. We pull a lot of that information directly from the Department of Labor to show different careers and industries that are in growth versus decline, what type of education is needed for those jobs, where those jobs are located, things like that. And so that's a great read for students that are still trying to make up their mind what they want to do. GSFC.org, if you need to contact us directly about your students' Hope or Zell. Remember to go to FAFSA.gov to fill out that FAFSA form. Don't go to FAFSA.com. And then if your students are interested in out-of-state schools, sometimes there's different policies and procedures with those. For example, they want the colleges listed in a certain order to apply for state aid at certain schools out of state, things like that. Just little tidbits, helps, things like that that may be helpful, especially if you're looking at out-of-state colleges. Definitely check out studentaid.gov if that's the case. And then if we can be any assistance to you guys throughout the process, we have reps all over the state to help students to answer questions that you guys may have. So I'm not sure where you guys live, Bartow County, I'm sure, but you know, check the map here. Feel free to reach out. My email is listed there along with the phone number. And then we're going to take some questions in the chat after the presentation as well. So thank you, Ms. Calhoun. I'm going to leave this up, but I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Ben, for that information. We do have I have a couple of questions that I had that came in, and if there's anyone else online right now, if you'd like to unmute to ask your question, or as Ben has already alluded to, if you would place those questions in the chat box. We are here to get our questions answered so that we are prepared. So I'm going to start out with this one question. Is there any special financial aid available due to COVID? You're muted.
Hey, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Can you repeat that one?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any special financial aid available, or scholarships or anything that you know of that is available due to COVID?
Not that I know of. Now, again, I mainly deal with federal and state aid. I do know that they've extended federal loans. So if you currently owe on federal loans, I believe that's extended through September. But in terms of any new scholarships or grants, I don't know of any new ones due to COVID currently.
Another question, and if anyone else has a question, feel free to place that in the chat, and we're watching the chat box, and or unmute and ask your questions. So another question that came up was about the student access loan. Do you recommend applying for it even if you're not sure that you will need it? Because I noticed that you said that there was a certain time frame that you have to apply. So should we go ahead and apply for that even though we may not need it? Or what's your recommendation?
I would advise to apply for it early. Even if you don't know if you're going to need the aid, you don't have to take the full amount. So in other words, you know, even though it's $8,000 a year, if you don't need that full amount, you can take just a lesser amount of that. But it would be better to apply early than to wait till later and then try and apply, because again, they only have so much to award. So if that runs out, I would hate to see you miss out on that. So the application does start in May, and you can check out the application again on the GA Futures website. And they do prioritize Hope and Zell scholars. So if you are a Hope or Zell recipient, you do have a better chance of receiving that. So, yeah.
Okay. There is a question in the chat box. Do I need to type an essay for any of the scholarships that you talked about tonight?
It depends on the scholarship. A lot of institutional scholarships may require essays. Are you familiar with the Etowah Foundation?
Yes.
Okay, I believe that they require an essay for theirs. I'm not sure. You'll have to double check that. Etowah Foundation is an excellent opportunity, especially for Bartow County residents. I think they are one of the largest scholarship committees in the state, maybe even the nation. They give away a lot of money each year. But each scholarship is different. So you'll just have to check and see. They have different requirements, and it depends on the type of scholarship too. Some may require it, some may not. So you just have to check individually on those.
There's another question in the chat box. I'm a junior. Do you anticipate any changes to financial aid eligibility by the time I apply?
There's no way of telling. This stuff is very fluid, and it changes with budgets almost yearly. Miss Gloria, I'm sure you remember just a few years ago, it was almost limitless the amount of dual enrollment that you could take while you're in high school. And now, 1 year later, they've limited that to 30 hours. So, as far as, financial aid, I would love to say no, but really it changes from year to year based on state and federal budgets. So the best thing I can tell you is any changes that we see happening, especially to federal or state programs, as soon as they are signed into law, we publish that directly on GA Futures. So follow us on social media, check our website, and anytime there are changes to those programs, that's the first place we put it.
Another question, how soon should we request acceptance into different colleges? Should that be done now before FAFSA?
Ms. Calhoun, this might be a good one for you. I can't really speak on admissions processes for the different schools. I think probably it would be a good idea to start applying sometime around, September of the student's senior year. I'm not sure how long the admission processes take with the different colleges in order to process the application and get the acceptance letter. But I do know if you're planning to fill out FAFSA, that application releases October 1st, and typically it's better to do it sooner than later. So, if you want to give the school a month, then you need to be applying, around the 1st of September. So I think it probably depends on the school, but you might be able to speak to that more.
So my response to that would be, if you are a senior, yes, you should apply now, but make sure that you're paying attention to the application deadlines. So you can still request acceptance into a college prior to completing the FAFSA application, but you want to complete that FAFSA as soon as possible so that once that school receives your information, they're able to calculate your financial aid package. So another question, if a student attended a school out of state but was Hope eligible, if they transfer back to the state of Georgia, are they still eligible for their Hope scholarship?
Good question, and is possible, but that's not always the case. And so let me give you an example. There's a couple things that it depends on. One, the student will need to maintain their Georgia residency. So don't go getting an out-of-state driver's license or anything like that, because that might impact that. Also, keep in mind that Hope and Zell and just about all the state programs are only willing to pay for the first 127 attempted hours. And so what I mean by that is, let's say you're going out of state to the University of Alabama to college. You get there and you take 30 hours of college credit and you decide you don't like it, you're coming back to Georgia. Even though Georgia didn't fit the bill for that first year, when you return, assuming you've maintained that Georgia residency, you now have 97 hours of scholarship. Because you took 30 out of state, they're only willing to pay for the first 127 attempted hours. So it is possible, but again, any credit you take after high school is being deducted from that total 127, whether you completed that course or you took it out of state or not. It's that first 127 that they're looking at. Good question.
Thank you for that. And so would that still apply even for the student access loan? So if they've attended out of state, they come back to Georgia, they are Hope eligible still, would they still be eligible for the student access if needed?
If they've maintained that Georgia residency, and as long as they're attending a Hope eligible school, you cannot use it out of state.
Okay. And my final question that I have, and I will continue to open up to the group. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. This is your time. This question was about federal work study. If you can explain a little bit more about that. The question was, does the money go in your pocket or does it go to the school if it's part of your financial aid packet?
A good question there as well. And it can go to either. So typically, if the student doesn't specify, it will come to the student just like a paycheck. But the student can specify, say, no, I'd like to use this towards my, room and board or whatever the costs that they're occurring there at the school. And they can have it applied directly to the balance of the school. But typically, if they don't specify that, it's just going to be like regular employment where they'll receive a check.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking your time to meet with us tonight. We have a great turnout, and I hope that everyone online was able to get your questions answered. And if you happen to have any other questions after we end this Zoom call,
I think she froze. Okay, let's see. Gloria, can you hear us? Carlos, can you hear us?
I can hear you fine, but I think she froze.
Yeah, she's frozen. She's kind of gotten kicked off, and Carlos is also on. I don't know if he can hear me. Give me 1 second.
Well, while you figure that out, looks like we have another question. I'll go ahead and answer this one. Looks like
Okay.
Malaysia asked, if I go out of state and apply for Hope or Zell after a year there, does the scholarship apply because I'll be a resident in that state, or would I qualify for the Hope or Zell? Just to recap, Malaysia, you can't use your Hope or Zell out of state. You can only use it in Georgia. So I think the situation that Ms. Calhoun was referring to earlier is if you went out of state to school, whether you paid for it yourself or got scholarships through private entities, and then came back to Georgia and enrolled, could you still use your Hope and Zell? And you can, but you have to maintain your Georgia residency when you come back. And then also any hours you would have taken at that out-of-state school are deducted from the total amount that you have to use. So in other words, if you took 30 hours out of state, came back to Georgia, even though Georgia didn't pay for those 30 hours, you would have 97 instead of 127. I hope that makes sense. yes, Hope can be transferred to different schools, assuming they're Hope eligible. Remember, you'll have to refer to that list to see the different schools that you can use. So if it's a private Hope eligible school, it's no longer going to be percentage based. It's going to be that flat amount. But if you're transferring from, let's say, West Georgia to, North Georgia College, then that transfer is very smooth. The scholarship follows you. It's tied to your social, not necessarily the school. If that makes sense.
Hey, Gloria, you back?
Yes, I'm back. Hey, everybody. So that's what we deal with technology. There is a question in the chat box from Gabby London.
Hey, Gabby, I would love to tell you can go ahead and start applying for the scholarships now, but I believe a lot of them you have to be a senior for. However, I'll say this, if you live in Bartow County, go ahead and start taking a look at some of those Etowah Foundation scholarships. Even though you may have to be a senior, you can go ahead and create a list of scholarships that you need to apply for. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, creating that timeline. Remember, your biggest enemy when it comes to scholarships is just missing the deadline date. So go ahead and create you a calendar of what scholarships you think you have the best chances of receiving, when those deadlines are, and go ahead and create that timeline. So when your senior year gets here, you can go ahead and start sending those applications off and don't have to worry necessarily about all the deadlines that you're coming up on because you've already done your research.
We also had a question coming from Facebook. They are requesting any links that are available, I'm assuming for scholarships for existing college students. Are there any websites or any links for existing college students for scholarships?
Just gafutures.org would be the biggest one that I'm pushing. Fastweb.com is a very large scholarship database. Scholarships.com is another very large one. And then check with your local high schools, and then also check out the Etowah Foundation for Bartow County residents. Those would probably be the ones that I would suggest starting with. And then your local high school should have a list of local scholarships as well.
All right. Are there any other questions? Great questions. So as I was trying to say before I got kicked out of Zoom land, in lieu of our annual college fair, we are promoting and encouraging students to attend a virtual fair that's